Okay, notifications coming out. Let me just see. So yeah, we are live. Hello everyone and happy Friday. Today we don't have Lisa with us. Last time I talked with her, she told me that she would move to some paradisiac place with sunny, so she could drink some tequilas and margaritas and enjoy. But anyway, you have
Enjoy some
myself.
sunshine.
Yes. So you have myself and Cedric here. And as you know, we have the third session of the serverless series. And we have Cedric with us to just explain all we need to know about Logic Apps. So, hi, Cedric, how are you doing?
Hey, Hugo. Good afternoon or good evening. All good here. Looking forward to do another great session. Like last time with the functions, we don't have too much slides today. We're gonna be in the portal most of the time. I would assume. We're gonna have a deeper look at what Logic Apps are and what we can do with it and when to use them. More importantly, sometimes even.
Yeah. And before starting, maybe let's just also, I ask everyone to please register to this session so you can access to relevant materials provided by Microsoft. You can use the link on the banner in the footer, or also you can scan the QR codes. Cedric will basically share with
Yep.
you.
Here we
So
go.
here we are. And in the meantime, also, it's important to clarify something with you, Cedric, and also to clarify to the people watching these sessions. I assume some of the materials you have been using, you will make those materials available on our GitHub repo, right?
Yeah, I can
Okay, so
add some of the code that I'm using here. I can add that to the GitHub so you can play with it yourself.
yeah.
So I'll be using some DevOps pipelines, for example, and that's definitely something we can share. Right.
Okay, great. So what I'm going to do is at the end of this session, I will share the link with you guys so you can access our GitHub repo and access all the materials relevant to this session and the previous sessions. Okay.
Perfect.
So I assume we are good to go then. I will,
Absolutely.
in case you did not have time to register to the session, don't worry. I will share this link via comments and you can use the link to register to the session. All right.
Awesome. Thanks.
Okay, let's go.
All right. So good day, everyone. Today we're talking about logic apps in our serverless series. As Hugo already said, please, if you'd be so kind, register here. Use the QR code or the link on screen. Helps us with getting an estimate of the impact we're making here with these community events, and also, of course, drive some of the additional community events we can host. Right, if we can get some good feedback from everyone here. Today's presentation, Logic Apps. The goal of the presentation today is, as with the previous one with functions, we're going to briefly recap what we said in our original series, just to make sure we set the stage and we know where we want to go to. And then I'm gonna explain some of the core concepts of Logic Apps that I think are fairly important, and then we'll immediately dive into a nice demo that, if you want, you can follow along. We are going to use some of last week's functions, so if you still have them running, awesome. If not, you could maybe over the weekend redeploy the functions and then trigger them or leverage them from your Logic app if you wish. So that's the first demo. The second demo is something a little bit new, a little bit, it's the same, more or less, and it's going to look a bit deeper into Azure DevOps and Logic Apps and how that works together. So let's just kick off immediately with a brief recap, right? Azure Logic Apps, the integration engine or workflow engine for Azure. So when you say Logic Apps, often people will say, "Oh, this is the integration services. This is the enterprise service bus for Azure." Well, at least a part of it, right? The service bus itself would probably be service bus. Now, what is important to know with Logic Apps, like last time, it's a visual designer, right? So you will not write code, although you can. There is a code block that you can import, that you can write your own code. But it's not in general meant to be written for code. Generally speaking, you will use the blocks that are there out of the box. It has about 200 connectors out of the box to connect with things like blob storage, of course, with other functions, with other logic apps, with API management and the likes, but also with services like Dropbox or Salesforce or your OneDrive. And the last one, something we probably might not have hammered on as much in the previous session or the first session here, is that Logic Apps is the B2B enterprise messaging service. Right? If you want to do integrations with other company and you want to exchange EDI messages with your partners, Logic Apps is for sure the way to go, right? Or at least one of the methods you could leverage. One question we get often is, hey, Logic Apps, cool, but there's also this thing called Power Automate. What's the difference? Right, and with this slide, I want to briefly zoom in on that. Power Automate is similar enough to Logic Apps, but it's targeted at your business users, right? The people working with you, probably as a developer, that are key to the business and to daily running of your company or the company you work at. When they want to maybe optimize something, maybe create some sort of quick workflow for themselves, right? If they get an email from someone, they want to trigger that Power Automate flow and then go from there. That's where Power Automate comes in play. Now, if for whatever reason that person makes it too big or too unmanageable and it becomes something a lot of people are going to want to use, you might want to, or you probably will want to step in and at one point export that Power Automate flow and import that or transition that to Logic Apps, or maybe even build a full-on API. Azure Integration Services and the on-premise data gateway, which encompass Logic Apps, Service Bus, the event grid that we talked about, things like functions, are for your integration specialists, right? So the people that develop or design those enterprise integrations, those business-to-business connections, that's where they come in. And then for the integration developers, you have the tool sets with Visual Studio and Visual Studio Code, which we'll see in a bit how that looks and how they can leverage that. Workflow Designer, we saw that last time as well. It's visual, you can do some control, you can do some basic stuff. So we're not going to spend too much time here. What I do want to show you later on is the last point here, and that's why I kept this slide, just to reiterate that, right? It works with Visual Studio. So often when people start with Logic Apps, they of course start in the portal, but you don't have to stick to only the portal. You can also work in an on-premise environment, design and build your Logic Apps on-premise on your developer machine, and the moment you're ready, you can commit it, upload it to your repository, and from there trigger your pipelines. So one of the core concepts for Logic Apps are your connectors. Now, connectors come in a couple of types, and we're going to see that as well in the portal. And the two main types are the built-in ones and the managed connectors. Your built-in ones are your classic triggers, your scheduler, a batch operation, maybe an HTTP trigger, maybe another Logic App triggering, Service Bus, and the likes, right? Basic stuff. Your control is there. Your variables are there if you wanna store some sort of variable or manipulate some variables. So really the basic stuff, that's your built-in functions or your built-in connectors. Second type, and that's where it becomes a bit more complex, because they kind of there's subtypes within the managed category, is your managed connectors. A managed connector essentially means services or connectors that integrate with other services, essentially, right? So if you want to connect to your Outlook to manipulate your calendar, or maybe send or receive or process emails, things like Salesforce integrations, reading, writing to FTPs and SFTPs, SQL Server integration, of course, those are all managed. Now, within the managed connectors, and that's something you'll see if you ever want to estimate the price of a Logic app. You'll see that there's standard and enterprise connectors, making your estimation even more difficult often, right? Because you're gonna figure out how many times are we gonna trigger, how many actions, and what kind of connectors are we using. So within that managed space, there's standard and enterprise connectors. And rule of thumb, when we think about enterprise connectors, think about systems like SAP, like IBM integrations. Those, generally speaking, are your enterprise integrations. Standard ones are, I mean, things you would use in a more common day-to-day world, right? If you want to know the details, get an overview. In our docs, it's pretty clear. They have a separate segment explaining which ones are the enterprise ones. And essentially, IBM, AS400, SAP. I think those are the most common used ones for sure. Besides this, there's also a distinction between connector types that can be used on premise and connector types that require an integration account. Just to make things a bit more complex and interesting, right? Not all connectors are able to connect to on-premise resources natively, right? Some are, like our SQL server connector, the file system connector. They do require an on-premise data gateway. So to leverage on-premise data or triggers, or to send or receive or manipulate data on premise from within a Logic app, you will need to have somewhere a server that runs the data gateway agent. And that one you can authenticate with Azure and authorize, and from there you have seamlessly native integrations with your Logic app. So you could have a server running on-prem with that agent and then read from a file share on-premise as you would normally, right? So you just / my file server / share, and then get all the TXT files there, for example, because you might want to then use your integration account to send those TXTs, parse them, convert them to EDI or EDFACT messaging, and send that to your partners. That second one, the integration account, we're going to show that later on in the second demo. We'll look into that because it's a bit, I mean, it's quite specific. It's the moment you actually start integrating with other companies and want to leverage some of these protocols you see here, AS2, EDFACT, X12, the moment you got to do that, or you want to go quite heavy in the XML transformations, that's when you need that integration account. Integration account, of course, adds a fairly significant extra on top of your integration. So be aware if you ever again need to do a pricing, or if you need to make a report towards management what you're going to do for integration, be aware of that, and an integration account is a separately billed unit in there. So with that, I think the first 10 minutes of theory are done, and let's look at a demo. So what I've set up today for you is, I mean, last week we created this very simple to-do applications, right? We created a couple APIs to create to-dos, to get our to-dos. We also made one to export to-dos just to showcase the Cosmos DB trigger. That last one we're not going to use, but the get and the create to-dos we're going to play a bit with from a Logic app context. The reason why I want to do this demo is mainly to showcase some of the control and variable usage and the flexibility you have with Logic apps if you want to do some nice integrations, right? Again, this is not something you would typically use in production, but just a collection of some things that I think you should probably know or be aware of, so you can then leverage that in your environment and adopt that to what you actually would need. So let's go ahead and go here to one of our research groups that I believe no, I did not yet. Let's create a resource group to keep everything again together, and we're going to do a manage to do, and this is going to be the live demo. And as usual, we're going to deploy that here in Ireland, in North Europe. All right. So we got our solution here. One thing I want to show you before, right? There is I've done some pre-work I have prepared some stuff. So I created here a dependencies Cloud Launch and Learn dependencies resource group where I made a Cosmos DB. Right, in that Cosmos DB, as usual, I have our to-do items collection with some to-dos, and as you can see, I preloaded a couple to-dos for myself in that in this Cosmos DB. Right, so that's for now all the pre-work that is kind of there. So from here, let's create a Logic app. Let me get my notes open here. And what we're going to create here is we're going to make a Logic app that's going to help us with our to-dos, right? So we're going to create a fresh Logic app that is triggered every workday in the morning at 8 a.m. And that is going to basically send us an email to say like, hey, these are your to-dos for today. I'm going to send an email per to-do because I want to show you how to use the for each loop. And we're going to send an email that expects a response. And we're going to show that in a second. The email will have a couple options, couple buttons in it where you can say, okay, I've done this to-do. I want to not do it today, or I want to postpone it, or I want to do it later today and I want to postpone it. So we're going to give 3 options to the end user to make sure that we can capture that response. So your application, in a way, the only front end you would need probably in this case is to create your to-dos. From there, you will get an email in the day and you can say, okay, I've done it, or I'm going to postpone it a day. So let's create a Logic app.
Cedric,
Yes, Hugo, go ahead.
Thing, can you please just zoom in a bit the browser?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Just in case someone is watching from the phone or the tablets.
Let me have a look here so I can see this. This should be big enough, I think, right, Hugo? What do you think?
Yeah, it looks good. Yeah.
Okay,
thank you.
Awesome. No worries. Thanks for reminding me. So let's do that manage to do live here. CLL manage to do live. We're gonna deploy this in North Europe. For now, no log analytics, and let's create this one. All right. Okay. So as we said, we were gonna do a recurrence. So we're gonna start with the recurrence trigger. We're gonna do a weekly recurrence, and I'm gonna do it once every week. Am I not? Okay, let's change that later on. We're gonna change the dates. We're gonna set an hour. The dates will be Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, of course, work days, and we're gonna trigger that at 8 a.m. And I'm gonna do that once, right? So every work day, I'm gonna trigger this recurrence. From there, next step is essentially I need to do a query on my Cosmos DB, right? So I need to go here and search Cosmos and add a query on Cosmos DB. So what we can do here is there is a query documents version 2, where we're going to use our dependency database, and we're just going to call that CLL Cosmos to-dos. All right, there we go. The database are to-do items, yeah, the items category, and then here we need to add a query. Now that query, what we want to do essentially is we want to get all the to-dos for myself, for Cedric, that are not yet done and that need to be done today or had to be done in the past, right? So if future to-dos that I need to do next week, we're not yet interested in that. Now to do that, and let me open an extra tab here, you can there's the extra tab. Sorry, there we go. All right, let's go to the Cosmos DB here, and let's have a look at that query first, right? To compare or to generate that query, essentially. I have it, of course, here, but I want to show you how that works and how easy that can be to just generate that query. So here we just got everything, right? Select everything from my collection. Now you can fix that collection here and just write classic SQL or SQL and just say, okay, where the name equals Cedric, which is not going to change much. Probably should use quotes, and where the C dot is complete equals false, of course, because you see here the one that I have opened, follow on Twitter, completed. So when we apply that, I should have a couple less, and I probably made a typo here. Where C dot name user, of course, edit filter, it is C dot user apply. There we go. So we have two tasks that are not complete yet. The get groceries, which I had to do today. And then I need to call a customer that is for the 6th of December. So I'll be working on Sunday, I believe, when I need to call customer 1 for a project update, right? So this is essentially the query, plus what we want to do here in our query is we want to add a date. Now, for that, you need to do a date request. I went ahead and, of course, prepped that. You can simply just do a date time add and then get the current time and add this part here. So the due date needs to be smaller than today plus 1 day. So if you apply that, we just get the get groceries. So this query here, we're going to select or copy and take with us back to our Logic app here and paste that in here. So we get select star from item C, where C.user, C.is complete, C is due, where we have all that. All right. From there, we get a potential list back of items. So we need to loop. So what we need to do here is we go to the built-in, right? We talked about that, built-in, and we need to do some basic control actions. We need to do a for each, and we're going to loop all our documents in here. Now, to be able to know what is in the document, or if I now add, for example, I want to email myself, right? I have Office here, and I want to do a send email with the details. Let me sign in real quick, because we'll need that later on anyway. So I just get the sign in portal here. Nothing special. So the moment I'm signed in here and I want to add a subject, it kind of like I can add current item, but it doesn't know what to do with it, right? So I need to kind of, let's say, unpack whatever I'm getting from these documents here. So let's delete that. We're going to delete the step, and we're going to add a fresh action. So what we need to do is we need to parse the JSON. I probably need to type this complete. So we're going to do a basic data operation. We're going to parse JSON. So the content here is going to be our current item, and the schema is essentially what we see here in our Cosmos DB. This is the raw data we get in, and this is what we want to parse. So again, we can, maybe too fast here, use a sample payload to generate the schema. So we're just going to paste in that sample message, and then it's going to generate for us, hey, we're going to get an object here with an ID, with a title, with a user, with a due date of the type string. We could change that to a date, so it might be easier to manipulate in later. But this essentially gives us access to all the relevant fields within that to-do item. Let me here make sure I'm on track. So from there, right, once we've unpacked that, we want to send that email. Now, by default, the first thing you'll think is, okay, this is just send email, right? So send an email. That's not what we want to do, right? Remember I said we want to send an email where I can click something and say like, hey, yes, this is done, or postpone for a day. So to be able to do that, you need to send an approval email. I'm going to show that email in a second, because it's quite pretty cool how that works. So let's send that email to myself. And we're going to say new to-do, and then let's add the title of my to-do, right? Because we unpacked that in our previous step. For options, we're going to say, okay, we can mark it as done. We can mark it as doing, and we can postpone, right? Those are the three options we want to give. normal importance. Other than that, there are some additional parameters we want to give. We want to, of course, give the body, because we want to add some context. We want to give the description. Then we want to say, hey, due date, by the way, is your due date here. So we also see what's going on. Just this alone, if we save that and give that a whirl, you'll see that it will parse, essentially go through the recurrence, query a document, and then for each document, in this case one, it's going to send me an email. So let me show that email over here. There we go. So I get an email from myself, of course, because it's the account I'm using, with this doing, done, postpone. So here I can just say, okay, I'm doing it. Right, thank you. Close that email, and this one will be here completed, and we'll see that the approval email result is doing. So we can get live feedback from that, and your Logic app will wait until your end user is parsing that. Now, of course, this, if you think about it, this is all kinds of issues, right? If that person is on leave, on vacation, and they're not working. So if you want to use something like this in a real world scenario, you probably want to first check that calendar. Is the person working today? If so, let's send those emails or something similar to that, right? So now that we know that, we can go back to the designer, and we can add a step after our approval email to then fix whatever we need to do, right? And to do that, we need to use a switch clause, right? Because we have three potential options. We have done, doing, or postpone with three distinct actions. So when it's done, we want to update the to do to done, right? To is done, I believe, or is complete to true. If we want to be doing it, we just want to maybe in later phases set a status update or something, or just kind of continue and ignore. And if we have, if we set postpone, we want to add an extra date to the due date, or we want to put the due date 1 day from now in the future. So again, this is a classic built-in one. And if you just scroll down here, you'll see there is a switch control. There's of course also a condition, right? If else, where you can do or conditions and so on. And in theory, because with the doing thing, we're not going to change much, you could use a condition, but I just want to show you that there's also this thing called a switch. So we're going to switch on the selected option, right, on what the user chose, and then I'm just going to copy paste because I'm notorious for mistyping these things. When it's done, we want to do something specific, and when we press postpone, we want to do something else. And then when someone presses doing, we're going to go to the default action here on the right and essentially not do anything. When it's done, we're going to call HTTP endpoint for our function. You could also leverage, by the way, the function endpoint. So if you search here for functions, you can trigger an Azure function, and I'll even show you. It just going to list your functions you have available. It's going to be the simple to-do one, and you're going to choose the actions. Now this, because I didn't upload a Swagger definition of this function, and I'm using custom routes, Logic Apps doesn't natively support custom routes, it appears, so you have to add that Swagger definition. If you have a simple function, you will be able to just click which method you want to trigger and go from there. That is why I'll be using just an HTTP endpoint, because my function is public anyway. So we're going to send an HTTP request. It's going to be a post because we're going to update our URI. And let me get that correct here for this session, is our update. And then we're going to add the header postpone, which I leverage to either postpone or not postpone, is going to be false. We're not going to postpone, we're going to complete. So is complete is true. Right. So we're going to do that to complete the message. We're going to update it. We're going to set it complete. We're going to not postpone it. And for postpone, we're going to essentially do almost the same, where the only difference here is going to be, it's also a post. It's this, and we're going to postpone is going to be true, and we're not going to update it. All right. So if we run that again as a test, I'm going to get another email. There we go. This is the email. And in this case, I'm gonna say, okay, this is done. Response has been registered. And when we go back here in our switch, if I didn't make a typo, it will have chosen the case, the done case, and sent that HTTP request with like, hey, it's completed, it's not postponed, and we got a response, and it has been updated. So that is how simple or how fast you could add an integration with user feedback, add a simple workflow where essentially an approval workflow where your users can leverage some where you can do some basic interactions. Now, what you want to do, for example, if you want to include the date here, you're going to have to create a variable. So the first thing you're going to do here in your designer is you're going to add an action here to initialize a variable, which is again a built-in functionality. Where is it? Let me just search for it. It's going to be faster. Variable. You're gonna want to initialize a variable. You're gonna want to set it like, for example, due date, and it's going to be a. Do we support a string? And the initial one, you want to do an expression, and here you want to search for date, for example, and you're gonna want to or today. What was the one again? Get UTC, I believe we have. UTC now, that's the one. So I want to get the date now, for example, I want to put that in there. In a second step, the moment you get in here, for example, you could, or you could do it already here, you could just add another step where you're going to do, after you parse the JSON, you want to set the variable, right? You need to initialize it first. Here you can set it the moment you have it, you have the value. So you want to do the due date, and in this case, you're going to want to play with the expressions to convert your string, or probably you want to parse your date as a date, and then you want to do some date time expressions where you're going to add a day to the UTC, right? So you could add days to a timestamp, and in this case, a timestamp would be, let's add that, and then the due date is our dynamic content, and then this one we need to put in here, of course. Sorry. So this is going to be your due date. Due date. You have to tag it properly, but that's essentially what you're gonna build it up, right? You're gonna add the dynamic content in that function here with your due date, and then continue building your expression to fix that time here. So let's close that. All right. So, and let's remove this one as well. Okay, we can save that, and now I have a daily reminder for my to-dos. All right, cool. So it was our first demo. Let me get to my presenter view again. The second thing I want to talk about are those, before we do the next demo, are about your, we talked about how Logic Apps is an integration platform, right? For enterprise integration to do your business-to-business interactions, and how that all connects with your PaaS and your SaaS, your cloud native, your Azure native components, your SaaS components that you might be leveraging, but also with your on-premise data through your on-premise data gateway. The moment you get to this type of integrations where you have B2B needs, where you're doing lots of cloud stuff, where you're doing a bunch of on-premise things, and where you need that extra security of some additional integrations, you might get to a point where you want to use an integration service environment, an ISE or ICE. Now, what is that, an integration service environment? It is, again, like we had with Azure Functions, it is still serverless but with dedicated compute, right? So you get an dedicated compute, you get private static outbound IPs and inbound IPs where needed, with load balance and stuff. If you want, you can do very important VNet connectivity, isolated storage, and a flat cost. And that last one, if you I mean, it's kind of logical, right? You get a dedicated compute, so you get a set of core, set of memory where your Logic Apps are running on top, and that is just a fixed cost. Now, what you also get with your integration service environment is an integration account. So we talked earlier, the moment you want to do B2B integrations, the moment you want to do X12, 80-fact EDI likes and the likes, you need an integration account, right? Because you need that account to manage those schemas and so on. With an integration service environment, that is included in it, and there are two tiers. Or at least two tiers. There's a premium or a standard, I believe, and a developer. So the developer one can be really interesting the moment you want to start playing around with integration environments, with integration accounts. That's where that developer account really is interesting to play around with, because the price difference is quite interesting, as you can imagine. Now, with an integration service environment, you get an integration account, and this is how an integration account looks, right? So we'll dive into the portal in a second to have a look at different parts there. But essentially, this is where you store your schemas for your communications, some of the certificates you use for that EDFACT communication and so on, your partner contacts and agreements and so on. So greatly helps you with facilitating your B2B integration. Right. Last thing that or one of the last things that I want to show before we dive back into some code and some sample data is the manageability of Logic Apps. So developers who are used to code, of course, they're used to having versions, they're used to having builds and rollbacks and the likes, and often that is one of the concerns. Like, hey, but if we go to this visual thing, right, this drag and drop thing, won't we lose some of that control on the versions, on rollbacks, on CI/CD and control and being able to develop locally and push it? The answer there is absolutely not, right? It is slightly different, but it's still all there. You still have versions, you still can do rollbacks, and that's built in. And even without leveraging any of the, without leveraging GitHub or Azure DevOps, there is version control and rollbacks in your Azure functions. By default, like with many of the Azure services, or practically all Azure services, you have extensive monitoring and diagnostics with trigger and run history built in again, right? And great integration with Visual Studio Code and Visual Studio themselves. Now, your trigger and run history are pretty interesting, right? You can have skip triggers, you can have succeeded triggers, and essentially from there, you can start reprocessing triggers. So if you have triggers that for whatever reason failed, you can rerun those triggers when you fix your Logic app and just reparse that message so you don't lose it. So let's have a look at that Visual Studio integration and that manageability for Azure Logic Apps. And let's see how we can play with Visual Studio to get code into Logic Apps. So the first thing I want to show here is I have a DevOps environment where I created a repository. Now, I already initialized this repository, of course, and everything's nice and working, but essentially that's all you need to do, right? You create a repository, you clone it locally, where you have basic, where you have access to it, and then you create a Visual Studio project. So when you go in Visual Studio, you just go new project here, and then you can go for in Azure Cloud, it's an ARM, Azure Resource Group, yeah, that's the one. And here you can choose solution name, that's relevant. If I create that from here, you can choose your Logic app. This is the wrong one, I believe. Wait, let me have a look, because it's an ARM project that I need. Let me have a look here. Azure Resource Group. What's the difference? Next, let's have a look here. Let's create this one here. Oh, this is where I want to show. And the moment you have that new resource group creation, this is where you can search for the Logic app. And from here, choose that Logic app that you want to create. Second, there's an alarm going off here. From here, you have your Logic app and some parameters that you can then add parameters to, like your database connection, certain runtime environments, whatever. These are parameters, and these can be customized because, of course, you might have different parameters for production, or you will have different, hopefully, parameters for production, dev, test, UAT, and so on. So you can work with parameter files here, and later on, I'll show in DevOps as well, you can play with that. Now, the cool thing here is that it comes with your deploy Azure resource group PowerShell script, where it's going to load a bunch of stuff to generate that resource group, deploy that ARM template that we're generating here without even having to touch too much ARM, because writing ARM from scratch quite challenging. Your Logic app itself is the JSON. So if we look here in the browser and we look at this code view here, this is essentially your Logic app. Again, not something you would enjoy writing, I can imagine, right? Writing this as JSON or just remembering the format. Who's got the time for that? And even the brain. This is, I don't think, made for people to study by heart and write by themselves. So in Visual Studio, you have the option to go to open within Logic App Designer. Now here you can again choose a new resource group and so on. So let's create a new one. We're going to do call this the CLLL VS Live. We're not going to deploy from here because that would probably take a bit too long and make the demo too long. But essentially, that's right. From here, you choose, you create. It's going to deploy, create that first resource group, and so on. So if you do that here, it's going to create that. Okay, and generating that resource group, and here we can just, as we did in the portal, in the portal, we can just go ahead and say, okay, when a HTTP request is received, we're going to do a new step. We have access to the connectors. We can do some inline code here. We can do a response immediately. We can do some SQL integrations. If we click, for example, here and search for Cosmos, let's have a look. Cosmos DB, and then go for deleted document, for example. We'll be able to see the Cosmos deployments we have in our subscription that we connected with, and be able to connect with them and even test from our PC our integrations. Now, this is not what I want to show you. I created a quite simple Logic app that allows us to, there we go, for the to-do application. So what we do here is we get, again, a simple post request with to-do, and we're going to create or update the to-do item and the response. This is the wrong one. Let me open the right one. Because what I want to do is I want to show the query possibilities from within your Logic app. So 1 second, let me get the right project open here. Logic apps CLL get to-dos. This is the right one. So I'm going to close this one, and we're going to open the correct project here. So this one's called get to-dos. Okay. So if I go here to my Logic app, right click, and can I get the open with Logic App Designer? Come on, Visual Studio Code. You can do it. Okay. So we're connected, opening the Logic app. And again, simple HTTP requests. We're going to query the documents in this case, right? So very simple to what we did earlier in our previous Logic app. We're going to get the documents for myself. And and then we're gonna do, or for the user, post it with the HTTP request, and as a response, we're gonna visualize the documents we found for that user. Now here we might want to add some additional filters, and we might want to just get whichever logic app is completed. So let's add that query where in this case it's I is completed. For example, we're going to change this to and I that is completed equals. Let's say we get the ones that are completed. And the moment we save this, this of course is in Git. It's connected to our repository. So when I open here my command line, I still like to do Git from command. You'll see that the logic app.json here in my CLL get to dos is modified. So I'm going to do git add logic app. I'm going to commit with the message fixed query to get only was it done to dos? It was done, or yeah. And then we're going to git push to our too fast maybe, to our repository. Now, if we're real fast before everything is done, if we go to that resource group here, before it gets deployed, let's be real quick fast. I believe I put it in get to dos. No, I put it in Logic App Visual Studio. When we create, I believe it's this one. When I go in here, you'll see it's the exact same logic app, and in my query documents, if we're on time, let's hope we're on time, you'll see that the query is still the old one, right? So in the background now, and let's go out of here, the get to dos, the update here, when we refresh that over here, you'll see that the logic app.json just now changed. So I have here a pipeline that is running. Okay, so it's only just running, so that's awesome. And that pipeline here, when we go into edit mode, it's super easy, right? What it's going to do, it's just going to build our solution and publish that artifact. That's all for now. You could, if you want to do some additional testing for compliance reasons, if you want, maybe just check the JSON for validity, or for maybe you want to do a check that your parameter files, for example, don't contain secrets. These kind of things you can do here. And once that is done, that pipeline, what we're going to trigger is a release. The release, again, to be honest, super simple, super easy, because the only thing we need to do is the moment that logic app artifact is published, right? So we have that trigger over here where we enable continuous deployment. So the moment that logic app is built, we're going to trigger this release pipeline. And the only thing we do here, super simple, like I said, is we're going to have a deployment scope in a connection that for some reason is not filled in, but okay, there we go. To my subscription here, we're going to create our update, this this resource group region, the artifact, the actual template for our logic app, the ARM template for it with logic app configuration, and the specific parameter file. So if you wanted, you could have a multi-stage release pipeline with various steps in the process, with maybe validation or manual approval gates, where developers or management might have to say, okay, everything looks good, we can continue with production deployment, but have that full control over the creation from conception all the way to creation of or deployment of your logic app. So by now our release should be triggered. We're doing release 11, and we can see here the logs where the agent should be picked up quite fast, hopefully, and from there maybe we can have a look at one that I ran earlier today at the logs while that is processing. What it's essentially going to do, right, moment it gets the agent, it's going to download the artifact and apply that step. Much more there's not to it. So let's see if we can get that to run. We got an agent, we are downloading, And from here, it shouldn't take too long anymore because it's a fairly simple template. And the moment here it is deployed, we will be able to see the changes in our Logic app itself. So let's have a look. All right. So we'll go back to our Logic app itself. Let's have a look here. Our query should be updated, and it is for some reason not. Let me refresh. Let me double check that I'm in the right resource group as well. Can we see that here? CLI Logic Apps VS, of course. Oh, wait, and then the Logic app here. Seems to be something wrong, but let's have a look at what I've done earlier then. Maybe I'm just looking at the wrong one. It's late in the day on a Friday, right? Let's have a look at the versions because I've done it earlier today, and we can see here it should have deployed. It seems the change has not been imparted here. If we go back 2 versions, you see that I added the and is complete is false earlier today, and then updated that automatically back to the user. So for some reason, my change has not been persisted in my Git. Maybe I committed the wrong file or something. To-dos, design build. Don't see it immediately. Did I forget to save? Oh wow. So I didn't fully save apparently. No worries. You can see what I've done here earlier, right? With the is complete, turned it on in false. If I would now again commit again and persist it, you would see the same happening here live. Now that brings us here to the various versions. So you could promote this one because the other one kind of failed. So we save from here, and now our query with is false is back in production, right? So when we go back here, when we go to the Logic app from here, and we go back to this is the one running, right? The one in production, we'll see that the is complete false is now added again. So that's a cool thing with the built-in versions. It just by default allows you to get into the details. A couple other things I want to show is the diagnostics here. For this one, I don't think I've triggered it much. But I mean, it stays the same right here. The 29th, I played a bit with it, and you can see, because this is quite interesting. If you want to properly estimate cost for the Logic app, you'll see that there's 28 executions, 8 triggers, and 14 actions. So in total, that's 28, right? So you see here, if you need to estimate, you'll know, okay, for these 8 triggers, there's 14 actions as well being executed, and you can correlate and from there extrapolate to your actual cost. So from the start, pretty interesting kind of diagnostics. You see alerts you might have triggered, success rate, and so on, throttling if you have that. Pretty interesting. From here, you also have some metrics. You have access to your logs if you turn on your logs, and again, you can do some interesting queries on top of that by default. One last thing I want to show in the last 5 minutes here. So we saw versions, we saw the designer itself, is this resource group here that I made with the integration account over here. So I have a Logic app here, integration demo, and an integration account. Now notice that this is a separate resource. So if at one point you want to do that B2B integration, you will have to create a separate integration account, right? Or an integration service environment. Now from there, when you create a new Logic app, and let me show you, it's gonna show you here. When you go to your workflow settings here, there is an option integration account to associate it with that integration account. And once you've done that, you will be able to configure properly your EDI, EDFACT, X12 messages and leverage those schemas and so on that you have, right? So when I get a blob, for example, I'll decode the EDFACT message with the blob contents. And from here, you can start adding your parameters and start leveraging those schemas and what's it called, partners and so on, right? So you have to, of course, import schemas here from a schema file, and so you can start processing and leveraging those. So quite important there, how to do that. So that's the integration account. Let me check my notes here. Did I hit everything? I believe so. All right, so let's bounce back real quick here to our presentation. And let's wrap up for today. Check, we said DevOps, we saw the Visual Studio and the diagnostics. Awesome. I think I covered everything I wanted to cover. As always, like to end with some learning suggestions. I'll check with Hugo to include them in the description of the of this YouTube video here. We got quite interesting learning path, built automated workflows to integrate data. So starts with introduction to Logic Apps, has a bunch of other steps or modules in there that are pretty interesting if you want to know more about Logic Apps. Second one is choose the best Azure Serverless technology for your scenarios. Goes like handles when to use a function, Logic App, Azure Container Instance. So also quite interesting for your reference. And with that, this Monday, next Monday, 7th of December, I'll be doing the last session in our Azure Serverless series, where we'll be looking at container instances, and where we'll try and trigger some container instances from a function or a Logic App, have some of that interaction between the other services, and make sure you see what Azure Container Instances is capable of doing, and what kind of cool stuff we can do from an ACI. Voila, that brings us to the end. Like I said in the start, if you can, please scan this code here or go to the link down below there and register to get some free learning courses, and make sure we get some good reporting on these events, so our benefactors can make sure to keep sponsoring these events, right? All right, Hugo, I don't know if you have, if there are questions that have been posted or that you would like me to handle that you've seen passing on YouTube.
Yeah, there is a question, and before we proceed to the question, first of all, thank you so much. Another great and amazing session that you provided to us.
Thank you, Hugo.
I also want to just let you know I'm going to post a comment with the feedback survey, please. So feel free to fill in the survey and provide us feedback about this session. It's really important for us as well. Also, I'm going to share the question with you. So before we proceed to the question, maybe please, if you did not have a chance in the beginning of this session, just spend a minute and register to this session so you can access relevant materials provided by Microsoft. And again, it's really important for us. And let's just, I'm going to load in the screen the question from Praveen for you,
Okay.
Cedric. So basically, Praveen says, how billing is done and how can we optimize the costs?
That's a great question, Praveen. The billing is done per action and per trigger. Let me get the pricing page here with us. Always a good idea when talking about pricing. So Logic App pricing depends on your executions and the amount of actions and the type of connectors you're using. So when we talked earlier about those standard and enterprise connectors, every connector has a cost associated with it, and your actions have costs associated with it. So when you want to connect, when you want to do a Logic App like I've done here earlier, and let's take a more reasonable one. CLL, the Visual Studio, for example. It has a connector, it has a trigger, it has a connector to Cosmos DB, and it has an outbound or a response. And when we go to the diagnostics here, you'll see for those executions I had, there's 8 triggers and 22 and 14 actions. So to calculate your cost here, you can take those 14 actions and map them to that 22 cents. And those triggers, I would say you could probably map either to these here, to the standard connector over there, because those are our standard connectors we've used there. If you use an integration service environment, it's a flat rate. Be careful though, I think it starts at 4,000 euros, the premium one or the standard one. And your integration accounts is a separate thing. It's I think about 800 euro almost per integration account. Now, to minimize costs, think about the amount of actions you use, right? Do you really have to do it in 5 steps? Can you maybe do it in 2 steps? Because that is going to impact your cost. And if you do find yourself into a situation where you have 20 steps within a Logic app, you might want to simplify those steps either by turning it into an ACI, into a container, or by turning it into a couple functions that you're loosely coupling, right? So managing cost purely comes down to how many actions are you going to do, and what kind of triggers or what kind of connectors are you going to use, right? If you're going to use a lot of premium connectors, it's going to be 8 times more expensive than if you stick to standard connectors.
Yeah, right. I think that answers the question. Let us know, Praveen, if you have any other question. I would say also, see, it's really what's really amazing of this service is the fact that it enables the full team, to build these workflows without depending on the developers. That's
exactly
because anyone, like even without coding skills, you can jump quickly to a Logic app, and using the designer view, you can build your workflows to your team, And
that's a great example, Hugo. Yeah, absolutely.
And also, as you know, there is a great efforts being done on the Power Platform as well, in that perspective of low code, no code platform to enable everyone. So yeah, that's the most important things about all this service. It saves you time. You don't need to worry about anything behind the scenes. You just use whatever you need to use, and you build and design your solutions and apps, and enables everyone, even people without coding skills. That's the amazing thing. Yeah. Awesome. I think we are done, right? I don't know.
I believe so. Yeah. If there's no other questions, I think that's it for today, and then we'll be back this Monday with the last session in the serverless series on container instances.
I will just, before we close out, as I mentioned in the beginning, all these resources, in case you want to access this resource related to these sessions, you can always access our GitHub repository. It's publicly available, so you can access via the link that you have on the banner, or also I'm going to drop the link in the chat so you can access the GitHub repository. And I assume that definitely Cedric in the next few days will make the materials available, so you can
upload the relevant resources.
Yeah, one important thing is, in case you want to also get notified anytime we make those materials available, you can always subscribe to our repo, and you will get notified anytime the speakers make those materials available. So it's an easy way, instead of you constantly go there every day to try to see if the materials are available, you can just wait for the notification.
Exactly.
And yes, please spend a minute and provide us feedback, because your feedback is really important, so we can improve things and deliver the best experience for everyone. Okay.
Awesome.
So I think that's it. Have a nice weekend. Thank you so much, Cedric. Thank you everyone watching this, and enjoy the weekends, and we come back on next week. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.